Okay, so yesterday I pulled out the timing chain. Main trick to look out for is make sure you line up the markings on this guy, right, to the oil pump housing. The main reason for that is to position the cylinders in the engine in a certain spot. That's why it's very important before you pull out the timing chain. Make sure you turn this guy's markings to line up with the marking on the oil housing, because when you loosen up the timing chain or attempt to loosen up the timing chain, these things, the cams, will actually spring out of sync into a neutral position because of the valve guides. The springs in the valves will turn these things out of whack. It'll just turn. And that will move the valves, and if the cylinders are in the way because you did not do this, then the valves will hit the cylinders. No, maybe permanent damage will occur, but you don't want it to be in that position for the engine. So, important thing, timing mark on this guy, line up with the oil pump housing. Then don't remove these screws, because this will want to spring out of its position while the timing chain is on. Don't remove these because you might get hurt, because this thing is going to spring out. Try to loosen up the chain by pulling the chain out of the teeth, and you will see that this thing will spring out of sync and basically loosen its own rotational tension. And when that has occurred, then you can remove the screws from this guy, the guy on the passenger side first, and you can actually pull this out, and when you pull this out, then you can remove the chain from the sprocket, and then you can do the same for here, and everything is now no more in tension in terms of rotational tension, but these gears are now out of whack. Okay, because when you put the timing chain back on, the only way to put it back in sync is by using those timing chain marking method. And when I put that on, I'll show you what I mean by the marking method. It's on the internet, but I guess it's better to see it live. Okay, I'm not changing these guides. They're in very good condition. The guides, here are the guides. They're like not even worn out. So pointless changing it. Even though it has 133,000 miles, because I believe I'm using the Mobile 1, the engine is super clean and all the parts are hardly worn out, which is what they say. Same goes with these guides. They're all in very good condition, so I'm going to leave them as they are. Okay, I'm only planning to keep the car maybe till 150, 180,000, and I believe it'll quite easily last that long without a problem. In fact, it can even last up to 200 without a problem. Because the condition of the guides are just so good. They're not even worn down. Okay, the sprockets are not worn down. The chain looks in an excellent condition. I'm going to measure it and see whether it has the chain stretched. When I put it back on, I'll be able to see that. And in my opinion, I mean, it may have stretched a fraction, but I'm not interested in spending $130 or plus to get the chain done. So I won't worry about it. So here's another picture of the both valve covers are removed. This one was a bit of a more difficult to remove purely because there were more hoses and stuff, so just watch for that. The clamps for these wires attach to these screws. There's two of these, so they are 8mm screws that has to be pulled out so the clamps can detach, and then the regular 10mm wrench or socket to pull out the nuts. Okay, so you can see now when pulling out the timing chain, which I did mention before, the first thing you do is actually pull out the primary tensioner. See that hole there? That's with the primary tensioner removed. How do you remove that? There's two bolts there that you remove the tensioner housing, and then you actually just pull or push the tensioner out, it'll pop out. Make sure you catch it. Now, and you have to actually remove this tensioner bolt to remove the tension in order to pull the chain out. And as I was saying, before even you can pull the chain out, you got to loosen the tension, the rotational tension that's in these guys, or else you'll get a surprise, because they need to be relieved, because the valve springs need to push, and therefore you must have this marking on the crankshaft aligned with the marking on the oil pump. Remember, this is not TDC marking, because being an interference engine, you must not have your cylinders at TDC, because when this thing is relieved, the tension is relieved, the valve may hit the cylinder, and you do not want that. So you must turn the this guy here, the crankshaft marking, to the marking on the water pump, which is there. Therefore the cylinder's out of the way, and then it doesn't really matter. When you pull this out, it won't hit it. Try not to move the crankshaft without the timing chain in place, because you just don't want the risk of the cylinders whacking the valves. Okay, which it will do. Alright. Okay, now it is time to be able to remove the water pump. So I just have to remove the upper guides. The bolt is one of the bolts for the upper guides is holding the water pump in place. So that's the water pump, and when it's pulled out, time to put the new one in. Okay, the water pump has been pulled out. Right, there's a lot of coolant that came out, so definitely put a lot of towels or paper towels just to avoid too much of coolant spilling everywhere. I'm sure some is unavoidable, but as you can see, there's a bit of coolant in places. There's a lot of these towels soaked in coolant. Obviously I'll be changing the oil. Tricks, the timing guides, the upper timing guides and the side timing guides do have to be removed in order to gain access to the bolts. Really it's the upper timing guide that you need to remove, but in order to get to the upper timing guide, you have to remove the side timing guides. In order to remove the side timing guides, you do have to remove this guy, pull it out, because it's easier to get to the bolts. Don't need to pull this guy out. You need to pull these guys out in order to gain access to it. That's the 12mm Allen wrench, well, hex key, sorry, and or you can use a 7/16 hex key. That also works. How to find a 12mm. Once you get that done, you will be able to pull out the 6 bolts. They're for the water pump. Crack the seal, the coolant spills out. Put a lot of towels or stuff to absorb the coolant to minimize spillage and contaminating just the bearings and whatever not. Some will fall, don't worry about it. And now regarding the water pump itself, sealant, I bought a primer, a seal primer. It's sort of brown gooey type stuff that I'll paint on both sides of the gasket, on the engine block side and on the pump side, to supplement the actual gasket, because that's what I found they did from factory. The brown stuff that you see, that's what it is. That will obviously help seal it, because you can't have any leaks, and that's where we're at. Okay, here's the old pump that has been removed. This stuff that you see here is like a prime sealer, right? So I've added that to my new installation, both sides of the gasket and both sides of the water pump, on the water pump and on the engine block. This is the old pump. Everything looks good, but pity that it leaked, but it's pretty sturdy considering it's 133,000 miles. Okay, the old pump has been removed. Now this is the new pump that has been bolted in. Basically nothing much to it, just on the gasket I put some of the brown sealant liquid, painted it on all 4 sides, because it's a metal gasket, so on the engine block gasket, and then on the other side of the gasket and the water pump, and put all the 6 bolts. They're 10mm bolts to bolt the pump into the engine block, and tighten it up in a sequence, basically opposite sequence, so therefore it's tightened up uniformly to torque specification. And then now timing chain is ready to be installed. So the timing guides have been installed. They are relatively straightforward. You can check it out in the manual, but basically these things get pulled off, so therefore the timing guides bolts can be accessed. And I have lined up the crankshaft markings to the water pump, to the oil pump housing. Got this guy and its marking lined up. Right, can you see the marking? Yep, lined up. And this guy with this marking lined up. Now this marking is meant to be here, so therefore it'll be in rotational tension. This guy actually needs to be here, which means it'll be in rotational tension, and that's the tricky part of putting up the timing chain, which is next. Okay, I've put the timing chain in. So here's the deal. Take this guy off, put the chain through the hole, through that hole, and then put this guy back in there loose and thread the chain onto the sprocket, and make sure the marking, the triangle marking which is there, lines up with the chain like that. Okay, thread the chain through the water pump. Right now the chain is extremely loose at this stage, and mind you, this is still loose. These bolts aren't there, so this is free to move. Remove this guy, pull it out, pull the chain through, thread it into its gears, and make sure this is lined up with that dot that's there. And this is still loose, not bolted on. Okay, and attach this guy and make sure the chain threads through this sprocket, and make sure that that gold piece lines up with the marking there. Use a mirror or something to be able to confirm. So basically now we have a lot of slack here, which is taken up by this, kind of held in place with this screwdriver. And here's the secret. The secret is basically you're going to now put a socket drive in there, turn it, this won't move, turn it so therefore the bolt holes line up, and stick a bolt in it and screw the bolt in. At that stage this part will be in tension, because this will want to move anti-clockwise. It will want to move anti-clockwise. You put these 2 bolts in. There are no bolts here yet, so right now there's tension in the chain on this side of the chain. Move down here, and using a socket drive, stick it in there and move the camshaft, so therefore these bolt holes line up, and basically you'll have to pull it this way to line it up, and once it's lined up it's going to attempt to spring back that way, and so therefore it's putting tension on this side in this direction. Okay, so what you have is high tension now on the chain from here to here via this guy. This part is still loose, relatively loose, but it's lined up good. This part is loose, but it's held in place. If it's too loose, this will slip, and that's bad news. Okay, so that's where we're at. These have been tightened to torque specs. Okay, and now we're ready for the tensioner, the hydraulic tensioner.